All right, what do you do when you have a child who continues with violent behavior and you can't fix it? Police can't fix it. Social services can't fix it. What do you do? A young boy in Winnipeg with a violent behavior has left police in that tough situation. He cannot be sent to a facility for help because he's under 12, nor can he be charged under the Youth Criminal Justice Act because of his age. Now, unlike Ontario, there is no law in Manitoba that says that you can take these individuals and put them in a secure situation. Of course, Ontario does have a law like that allows you to put these people in a secure situation and, of course, get them the help they need. That doesn't happen in Manitoba. That being said, what do you do? How do you move forward when you have career violence like this starting at an incredibly young age, as in under 12? Gary Dierenfeld is with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com to find out more, and he is with us now. Hello, Gary. How are you today?
I'm good, Scott. These are real conundrums that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, this is, you just assume that kids won't be so violent at such a young age, although we are certainly seeing this happen at a younger and younger age. So what does the future hold for these kids?
I got a feeling we're going to see some changes in the years to come to the youth criminal justice system, such that we have more options available for dealing with the under 12 crowd, young persons, children, who are a danger to themselves or others. Depending on the province you're in, we may or may not be able to place a child in a secure facility for a substantial length of time to keep them and others safe while they actually get the treatment they need.
This child, and again, we don't know the exact age, but increasingly violent crimes in the last few months, including theft, arson, break-ins, and a stabbing. How is it possible to counsel someone away from that when they've started in this behavior at such a young age?
Well, that was always the thinking with the Youth Criminal Justice Act. And that's why we kind of have this differentiation. And the differentiation is those under 12, 12 to 14, and 14 to roughly 18. And, we saw these as different periods of life. And because we're talking about children, we still like to think that they're malleable, that they're open to persuasion, that they're open to change the result of, changing their life and changing their circumstance. And so with that thinking as well, we don't think in terms of, incarceration the way we would for an adult. We think in terms of keeping them in a secure setting so we can hang on to them long enough to be of an influence upon them. And who would have thought, 20-plus years ago when the youth criminal justice system was being revamped, that we would have such dangerous children in the under 12 group. But we are seeing more and more dangerous kids.
Obviously, he didn't come from the best family, and there's this, a series of criminality within the family itself. Obviously, if that's the situation in which the boy is being raised or has grown up in, you can certainly see how this has happened. You certainly are what you live. Is it just a case of being put with another family to realize, hey, not all families are like this?
Well, this is a child that you won't be able to hold on to long enough in an open setting with any other family, which is why we need a closed or secure setting. The other thing I want to caution ourselves about is being pejorative to the family that this child was raised in as being a bad family. It's reported in the media that this child is of Métis descent and is being helped through Native Child and Family Services. We have to appreciate that this, in part, is a made-in-Canada problem. When we have so disenfranchised Native Canadians, our Native communities, our Aboriginal people, when we have dislocated them from their families, when we have literally beaten the Indian out of the child, this is what happens.
Yeah.
And so we don't acknowledge that. We just kind of step away and then point to the current behavior as if it kind of happens in a vacuum with parents who are simply bad parents.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, we're talking about the 1960s scoop.
Yeah.
This is the fallout of that thinking, of that behavior. This is how we pay for it transgenerationally. So, in a circumstance where this child is concerned, we have to be mindful of his heritage. We have to be respectful of his heritage. And really, apart from being in a secure setting where we can actually hang on to the lad, treatment has to include a cultural sensitivity.
As you mentioned, this issue a lot more complicated than just a bad kid.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly there's lots of talk lately about Native heritage, Native issues, and what we have to do to correct that. Are you worried that in this land of politics and political correctness that we still will miss the mark here? Because we seem to be addressing this the same way year after year after year, political party after political party, leader after leader. They all come in with the same intention.
Right.
Do we need a different philosophy now? Can we keep trying to fix this the same way?
Well, hopefully the truth and reconciliation, hopefully the recommendations are adopted. Key in those recommendations is a rewriting of the Canadian history book. Because omitted from that history book is our systematic oppression and annihilation of natives and native culture. And so as we bring that to the Canadian conscience, then the Canadian conscience will demand something different. And in fact, we're seeing that. I mean, Gord Downey Jr., he was amazing. We say goodbye to the tragically hip, yet this fellow still takes a look at Trudeau and raises the issue of Native needs. And so this is how we are shifting the Canadian consciousness. So when we talk about something like this boy in Manitoba who's so out of control at such a young age, rather than shame and blame on the boy and family, we can look at that as being symptomatic of these larger issues, and that breeds, hopefully, compassion, empathy, and with that, the services and the dollars that are needed to drive those services.
How, if we hadn't tried to assimilate, what would Native life be like now?
Wow. Well, what's your life like now? You get to do what you want. You get to practice the faith of your choice. You get to go about freely. You feel good about yourself in life, in the community, in the workplace, and you kind of don't think about these things. You just live a life. It's very different when you are systematically oppressed. You're always thinking about, I'm second class, I'm under the thumb of the oppressor, I don't have the same kinds of advantages available to me, and I'm always having an uphill battle in front of me for anything that I might want to do. When I apply for a job, the color of my skin is first and foremost in front of me. My culture may be, held against me. So how would life be different? They'd be like you and me. Potentially.
So if we had left them alone, would they be just as successful as any other immigrant who's come to the country over the last however many years?
They're not the immigrant. We're the immigrant.
I'm aware of that. But would they be? I'm not saying that. You're misconstruing what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, would they have been as successful as any immigrant that had come to the country?
Well, they were successful. It wasn't a we-them thing. It was just a them, and they were carrying on their life reasonably. They were living off the land. They were stewards of the land. They were taking care of business and their family. They were living their life.
You can't lead the same life now, though.
Well, of course not. But the trajectory changed when the white man showed up. We threw them to the side. We said, here you can play, run, and work on this plot of land, and your needs and your issues, your views, your culture, your faith not only do they not matter, we consider them inappropriate. What does that do to a person? What would that do to you and your descendants if I were to take you today from your life as you know it and say, all bad, and I'm going to put you in this new life where the messages are, as you knew yourself, all bad, and now you have to learn and do it only our way, which we consider all good.
When the governments of the day were doing that, why were they doing that?
Very good question. In part, we'd have to ask the governments of the day. Some of it came.
Well, let me make it very simple for.
Hang on, Scott. Some perhaps from good intention. Maybe we thought our way was better. We look at them and we say, savage, and therefore this is the culture, the proper way of doing things. So some may have been good intention, some may have been poor intention. We're just going to annihilate you because you're different, and we certainly see those prejudices masked as good intention all the time throughout the world.
So you don't think that anyone was trying to help by this?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could be double-edged.
How do we help now by not doing the same thing?
We help now by being aware that there isn't one way of doing things, i.e. our way. Mm-hmm. There are a multitude of ways of doing things, neither of which are good or bad, right or wrong. They're simply different.
But why is it so hard for us to accept that when we live in a land of immigrants where we're accepting different people's cultures all the time?
Well, first of all, I would argue as to whether or not we're accepting people's different cultures all the time.
Well, we're certainly doing it better than most.
In Canada, I really don't know what to do with that statement, because certainly even in Canada, with the last government, we had a lot of Muslim bashing and shaming. So even in Canada, there was a huge, whether or not you wear the hijab, like all these things became issues. So I don't know if we're necessarily doing a good job of that. If someone looks substantially different from the majority of the population, we look at them and differentiate them from us and say, us good, them bad. And so we do sometimes have low tolerances as a society, even in Canada. So we're always working against that. Don't get me wrong, I love Canada. I think we're a fabulous nation. But it's not to say that we're not without our problems. And our history with respect to Native Canadians really points out our shortcomings.
Can we...
I'm passionate about this.
No, I can... Yeah, and as am I. But, it's... What I fear is we are going to continue to throw money and make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I love the fact that we're focused on this, but I'm not convinced that we know what to do.
Right. So part of the answer is money. It's one of the only means we have available in society to compensate for one's wrong against the other. But beyond the money, again, when we look at the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, those recommendations go a lot deeper than money. They go to our values, they go to our educational system, they go to our social services. Very recently, there was the finding, I think, by the Supreme Court, correct me if I'm wrong, that for every dollar spent on child welfare in Canada, generally only 70% of that dollar gets spent in the Native community. There are still these kind of systemic disparities that have to be righted if we're going to really change the trajectory that we want to see change.
Is the answer making life better on the reserves, or is the answer integrating this community with the other communities in Canada the way everyone else does?
So it's not
should we still, to me sometimes, Gary, it's as if this whole exercise is an exhibit at the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Ottawa. It reminds me that we're treating this like an exhibit, instead of how we make and help this group in society and to integrate with the rest of society. It's like we're doing our best to keep it a separate show. And I don't think that's the answer, because that's never been the answer in the melting pot or mosaic or whatever you want to call it that is Canada. We all come here, not we all come here, they've already been here, as you pointed out, but people come here from all over the world. They keep their culture, they enjoy Canada, they contribute to society. We all function as one in these different little groups. Why do we segregate Native people? Why do we put them in a different category?
So you talked about melting pot versus mosaic. I'm glad you mentioned both of those. There is a significant difference between the Canadian mosaic and the Canadian melting pot. Those phrases really hit home to different ways in which we live in Canada when we're from different places. I grew up at Bathurst and Wilson in Toronto. In Toronto in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up, it was a mosaic. That means there was a patch here, a patch there, and a patch there. So I lived in the Jewish patch. Mm-hmm. If I were Greek, I would have lived, perhaps on the Danforth. If I were Italian, I would have lived up and down Dufferin. If I was Portuguese, south on Dufferin. That's a mosaic. There's a myth that we're a melting pot, that these communities are all totally integrated. They're not, and they are still not. So yes, there is more integration, but we still remain this mosaic. The other element in this, whether you want to assimilate, not assimilate, throw away your history and your culture or whatever, for most of us, that's a choice. For most of us. We get to say how much I want to be assimilated, how much I want to retain my culture and my religious practices. When it came to Native Canadians, we robbed them of their choice.
Yeah.
Huge difference. Huge difference.
So what does that new model look like?
The new model is respectful. The new model looks at you and says, what would you like? Because that's what every other Canadian has.
Yeah.
We get to make choices. What would you like? You want to live on the reserve? You live on the reserve. You don't want to live on the reserve? Don't live on the reserve. There are choices, and we always respect people's choices. That's actually, hopefully, more the Canadian way.
Is that possible with this issue? How do we come together on this?
Well, hopefully we get there. Hopefully we respect that all people's right to self-determination. That's the value that is underneath that, self-determination. Up until this point, we haven't, the predominant culture, haven't provided for that kind of self-determination to the Native people. Why would they not have that inherent right like anyone else? So the laws have to reflect that. The history books have to reflect that, as opposed to an us and them where they've got the problem, we're all fine, without recognizing the degree to which we're the source of their problem. So as we take that responsibility, make amends, and afford them the same choices that anyone else would have, then they get to practice their culture, they get to reignite their language, their history. They get to feel proud about themselves, as all of us should. And then they're not fighting the oppression. They get to just live life like all of us should.
Gary Dierenfeld has been with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com to find out more. Fascinating topic. Always enjoy talking with you, Gary. Thanks very much for the time.
So enjoyed this, Scott. Thanks ever so much for this conversation.
Thank you, as always. And, we were supposed to hit 2 or 3. We only hit 1, but we thank you for that. Thanks, Gary.
Take care.
It is 2:56. That's a wrap for the show. Thanks for tuning in. As always, greatly appreciated. Thanks to Liz and Jacob for producing today, the CHML Afternoon.